Okay, members, good afternoon, and that is us into open session of this afternoon's sitting of the Education Committee. So you're all very welcome, and we'll deal with housekeeping first of all. So I would advise members, as usual, that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And I would advise those in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So item 1 on the agenda is apologies. We don't have any apologies. John is joining us remotely, so just as normal, John, if there's any issues with your connection, audio or access in the meeting, do just go through the clerk to let us know that. And I'm just noting, I don't think I have my phone on silent. You bear with me. Apologies for that, members. Item 2 then is chairperson's business. So just one item of chairperson's business. I'd advised a correspondent that I would make committee members aware that Little Oaks EOTIS Centre will be opening its doors formally on the 20th of November, and that's on the UN Day of the Rights of the Child. I'm already committed to attending the Children's Commissioner event on that day here, so I'm unable to make it, but they were very, very keen to get committee attendance. I'll maybe just flag up for any of our reps from the Northwest that might be one you're interested in, but they really did seem
I should be able to attend that.
Oh, hopefully then, if the deputy chair. So I think that they'll be very pleased if that was possible, as they seem keen to get representation from the committee there. But I'll leave that one with members. So item 3 then is declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest they wish to make? David?
Sure, obviously we'll be discussing the trip to Israel later. I was a participant in that trip.
Thank you. No other indications. If anything should arise during the course of the meeting, please do indicate so that it can be noted. Item 4 is matters arising. I would just draw members' attention to a piece of correspondence that I had asked just be tabled again, as it was quite lengthy correspondence from the department, but we were coming to it very late in the meeting. So that's at page 7 of your papers, and it's the department's response providing further information on their briefing on the PAC report on SEN. I'm going to propose that we note at this stage, but I would suggest that for the finance briefing that we're receiving later, that there is quite a bit of material there around value for money in relation to special educational needs that members may want to pick up in that evidence session. Are we agreed to note? Mm-hmm. Great. And then item 5 is the draft minutes. So I would refer members to the draft minutes of the Education Committee meeting of the 5th of November 2025 at page 12. Are members agreed that that's a complete and accurate record of proceedings? Are we agreed?
Right.
Great. I'll just sign these. Okay. Okay, so that moves us on to item 6 on the agenda. Now, just before I bring anyone forward to speak to that, just want to highlight at this stage, so we are going to receive a briefing today in relation to the proposed committee bill. So we have Clerk Assistant Stephanie Mallon joining us today to speak to that. There is a suggestion that we should take that in closed session so that members can have a full and frank discussion around the pros and cons and potential approach around a committee bill in relation to school uniforms. Before we seek agreement about moving into closed session, I just should point out that we received very late today, we received the guidelines from the department in relation that arise from the school uniforms bill. So I'm going to assume members are unlikely to have had the time to read that in detail. I have only had the opportunity to have a very, very quick scan of those, but I think it is worth just speaking to them briefly, and then we'll have a quick word around moving into closed session and making a decision on that. Some of my fears are being confirmed from a scan that the guidelines don't feel terribly prescriptive, and I think that was always members' concern. So we're in a scenario where schools must adhere to these, but I've already clocked 47 uses of the word should and 14 uses of the word may, and I had hoped for something a bit more robust that is just crystal clear for schools about what they need to do. So I think it's already my suspicion is that this could be a missed opportunity, but I don't want to comment in too much detail before I've really had the chance to read them through. And it would have been very helpful to have seen those much earlier in this process. I do note some of the definitions in there around costs as well. it's quite a labyrinth definition of cost to set out there, which again I just worry the more layers that you add into this, that the greater potential there is to create wriggle room that we may not want schools to have when it comes to particularly the issue of just nailing down the affordability. But I don't really feel there's a huge amount of value in having a lengthy discussion around guidelines we haven't seen. So I'm happy to open it up to members, but I would just ask, conscious that we have a big agenda today, and I don't want to take up too much time. Does anybody want to speak to these? We can revisit this at a further meeting whenever we've had the opportunity to read them, unless anybody has any initial views. Michelle, quickly.
I haven't read it all either.
Yeah.
I've been going through it. The only bit that did jump out, and I think it's worth, is the bit at the end about practical ways that schools can reduce uniform costs, and it's not in the statutory guidelines. Yeah. And there's a very nice list of things there I think you would hope to have seen as clearly as they're stated there in the guidelines. I agree with you in the language, a lot of reasonable, a lot of may. You could do this. I think anybody who has the right spirit around this, there are things in there that can make a difference. For anybody who does not want to embrace it, I think there's plenty of ways to get around it. That'll be an initial impression. And
I think obviously we are in the space of just initial scan reads. I hope that's not the case. I think at the end of this item in the agenda, if there's any actions arising from the provision of the guidelines, that's probably the appropriate point to decide on that as well. So no other indications on that basis. I'm going to suggest that we move into closed session so that we can have just a full discussion around the committee bills, just so all views, the proposed committee bills, so all views can be aired. Are members agreed to go into closed session?
Agreed.
Yeah, if we can move into closed session then. Okay, so that is us back into public session of the committee. The committee had a discussion around potential options around a bill on school uniforms being brought forward by the committee, and there were a range of views discussed as to the merits of bringing forward a bill in the first instance and what such a bill may contain. It was agreed that final options for discussion would be considered at next week's committee meeting, and we will take that forward at that stage. So apologies to our witness for the delay. That was a lengthy discussion in closed session, which was never ideal, but sometimes can't be avoided. That does bring us on to item 7, so I'm happy to invite the witness forward. So item 7 is a briefing from Ronnie Armour, the Interim Permanent Secretary at the Department of Education, and it is around questions that the committee wished to explore around the Minister's visit to Israel. So Ronnie, thank you for your time and thank you for your patience in waiting to come through, and I do apologise for keeping you waiting. I think at this stage it's probably better to just hand over to you to make any opening remarks that you would like to. Up to 10 minutes should you require that. Probably the bulk of the session will be question and answer, and we'll, if I can ask members to just be conscious of time, as we are running behind now on the agenda. But Ronnie, I'll pass over to you for any initial remarks or statement you wish to make.
Okay, Chair, thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. It's my intention to provide you with what I trust will be a clear and factual account of the role played by the Department in relation to the recent visit of the Minister of Education to Israel. With the committee's permission, I plan to address the actions undertaken by officials before, during and immediately after the trip. I'll also deal with my own personal involvement. This may take a little more time than you normally allocate for opening remarks, and I apologise to the committee in advance for that. Chair, if I may begin, I want to outline the nature of the trip to Israel. The invitation for the visit came directly from the Israeli Embassy in London to the Minister and invited him to join a delegation of representatives from the devolved administrations. The stated purpose of the visit was to gain insight into Israel's cultural, social and political landscape. It was not framed as an educational visit, nor was it organised through the official departmental channels. The trip was therefore not subject to departmental approval processes. The department did not fund any aspect of the visit, and no public expenditure was incurred on travel or accommodation. All trip costs, including insurance costs, were met by the Israeli Embassy. The trip was planned and organised by the Israeli Embassy. By that I mean they booked the travel, organised the insurance, and developed the itinerary, which was received on the day of departure. In this context, no departmental advice was commissioned or provided in relation to accepting or declining the invitation, and no briefing materials were sought or supplied prior to or during the visit. If I can cover the involvement of officials prior to the visit. The involvement of departmental staff prior to the visit was limited to a small number of administrative tasks, such as providing a letter of acceptance and confirming travel logistics. These were undertaken within our private office. These actions were considered necessary to manage the trip within the Minister's overall official diary and to coordinate the cancellation of other official engagements. Private office staff also obtained IT security clearance to allow the Minister to take his mobile devices and therefore work during his trip. The appropriate permissions were obtained in line with normal departmental procedures. Based on the records available, private office staff undertook approximately 10 actions, largely short email responses. The time spent by them on these was minimal. Chair, if I may turn to the involvement of officials during the trip. I want to be clear, no departmental officials went on the trip, nor were they present at any engagements, either in person or remotely. Following the visit to a school on Monday the 27th of October, the Minister requested that a press release be issued relating to the visit. He provided an account of the visit, photographs and details of those he met. In response, the Departmental Press Office advised me of this request and prepared a draft press release, which they subsequently sent to me for clearance. By way of context, I was on holiday and out of the country at this time. On receipt of the draft, I reviewed the text, which was a factual account, before approving it for onward transmission to the Special Advisor and the Minister for their approval. Chair, I think it's worth taking some time to outline my thought process in granting approval. In considering the draft, I was conscious of the following facts. The Minister had made a request, and the threshold for refusing a ministerial request is high. The Minister was not in Israel on an official departmental trip. The Civil Service Code of Ethics requires civil servants to uphold the principles of integrity, honesty, objectivity and impartiality, all of which I take very seriously. Separately, I was conscious of the guiding principles for communications issued by the Executive Information Service Press Office, which indicate that all communications should be factual, relate only to the business of your department unless jointly agreed with another relevant department, be cleared at the appropriate level as agreed with your Minister and senior officials. I considered the press release in the context of the above and concluded that it did not contain political content. It provided only factual information. It was relevant to the Minister's portfolio. It was not an unlawful request. It did not breach a statutory duty. There was no improper use of public funds, and it did not appear to breach the Civil Service Code of Ethics. The Minister had indicated publicly that he was in Israel as part of a wider delegation. A school visit had been arranged during his trip, and the press release provided transparency to that visit. I therefore approve the press release for consideration by the Special Advisor and the Minister. The content of the social media posts was drawn from the press release by Press Office and issued in line with the normal practice within the department. Chair, in the context of the limited role officials had in preparing and clearing the press release, I am content that all required internal clearances were obtained and appropriate NICS protocols observed. Chair, I am aware that members may not agree with my decision, and I'm equally conscious that had I have taken a different one, it would not have found universal approval either. The involvement of officials after the trip. On Sunday, the 2nd of November, on my return from holiday, I was advised that concerns about the involvement of departmental officials in the trip had been raised with the head of the Civil Service. The head of the Civil Service was undertaking a fact-finding exercise, and as my line manager asked me to address a series of questions about the role of departmental officials. To answer those questions, it was necessary to work with a small number of colleagues within the department to collate the required information. I responded to the head of the Civil Service on the 10th of November on a private and confidential basis in recognition of the personnel aspects of the information provided. While the information which I have provided to the head of the Civil Service is consistent with the full account I'm providing to the committee today, the document I prepared is not for publication. Turning to the discussion with the Minister, I met the Minister at lunchtime on Monday the 3rd of November to review the visit to the school in the context of the provisions of the Functioning of Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2021. The Act sets out two obligations. It requires that the Permanent Secretary of a Northern Ireland department ensure that appropriate arrangements are put in place for a relevant meeting, including an appropriate written record. Secondly, it requires that a minister who holds a meeting with a third party about official business must take such steps as are reasonable to ensure that the meeting is attended by a civil servant. A relevant meeting is a pre-arranged meeting set up to conduct official business. The Minister indicated that while he had expressed an interest in an educational element to the trip to learn about the education system in Israel, his visit to the school was only finalised when he was in Israel and included the wider delegation. He indicated that during a tour of the school, he met school staff and officials and heard from them about their educational approaches. While he provided a brief update during conversation with staff and officials about Transform Ed, he did not discuss his ministerial functions. No actions were taken or agreements reached. Separately, the Minister indicated that during a dinner attended by the delegation, he heard briefly from an official sitting next to him about the educational system in Israel. He indicated that he did not discuss his specific ministerial functions at this or during any other engagement. Again, no actions were taken or agreements reached. Based on the information provided to me by the Minister, it was concluded that the visit and the dinner did not fall within the definition of relevant meetings. During that meeting with the Minister, I also indicated that I had undertaken initial fact-finding, and from the information I had seen, negligible civil service resource had been deployed in the context of undertaking administrative tasks which were necessary and appropriate to manage the trip within the Minister's overall official diary commitments. I also confirmed that I had considered the draft press release carefully and had concluded it was a factual account of the visit and therefore appropriate to issue. Chair, I hope that you and members have found the information I've provided helpful. I've sought to give you a full summary of the involvement of departmental officials, and I'm grateful to the committee for the time I've been afforded to do so. In conclusion, I want to assure the committee that I and my colleagues take very seriously our responsibility and remain committed to upholding the highest standards of governance and accountability. I hope this account provides the committee with clarity on the department's actions, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you for that statement, and thank you for, I should have noted at the start, giving your time to committee at such short notice on the issue. That is appreciated given the level of public interest in this issue. Just to be completely clear, and I think that this was addressed at the very opening of your statement, but just to be clear, because there has been departmental involvement at various stages, particularly the visit to the school, just to be clear, was that a ministerial visit? Just to be clear on that.
Minister visited the school as part of the wider delegation.
And was he there in his capacity as the Minister of Education?
Well, Chair, he is the Minister of Education. He wasn't. It wasn't a pre-arranged visit. It wasn't with the cooperation or involvement of the department. He was there as part of a wider delegation, but in reality, he is the Minister of Education.
We all understand that in various roles in this place you wear multiple hats. I do understand that. We understand that if a minister accepts an invite made to him as Minister of Education and he goes to a school somewhere in Northern Ireland, that absolutely it's crystal clear that he'll be speaking in an official capacity on that issue. But if the minister just drops into a school and provides no context as to how he is there, or a school invites him, personally, verbally, would you like to come in, and the minister arrives and has a conversation and then issues a press statement about it, that becomes less clear. So I don't think we're into hair-splitting territory here, and you'll know as a senior civil servant that the importance of those distinctions is really, really crucial, especially if public statements then follow that visit. So from your assessment as the most senior official within the department, was it clear whether or not the minister was there acting, speaking and operating in his official capacity as Minister of Education?
The minister was not on the trip in Israel in his official capacity, and I said that in the statement.
On that basis, why was the department anywhere near press releases on something that was a private? And I think we need to be clear from comments that the minister made in the Assembly chamber before going on that trip, a very political trip. It had a political agenda. The minister has made very political comments about Israel and the wider conflict in that area. But it was not a ministerial visit. He was not there as in his official capacity. Why was it appropriate for the department to be involved in making public statement around that visit?
The minister requested that the press release be issued. And I think, as I tried to explain in my opening remarks, that was a request from the minister. I took that request very seriously. The threshold for refusing a ministerial statement is high. Section 4 of the Department's Northern Ireland Order 1999 is clear. The functions of the Department shall at all times be exercised subject to the direction and control of the Minister. So I operate under the direction and control of the Minister. He had made the request. I considered that request in the context of Section 4. I considered it in the context of the guidance available. I looked at the press release very carefully. It was a factual account. I did not feel, within the constraints that I operate, that I was in a position to refuse the request of the Minister for all of the reasons that I outlined in my opening remarks, and therefore I gave approval to that and take responsibility for giving approval to it.
Clearly, I'm not going to ask you, and nor would it be appropriate for me to ask you to give any views on issues pertaining to Israel and Palestine. It's not under your remit. But as a point of fact, you must have been aware of the significant controversy that surrounds that conflict, and the significant range of very different opinions and strongly held opinions across a spectrum of views on that issue. So there was clearly, to my mind, never going to be a sense that any official looking at that would have considered the visit to be in some way likely to be non-controversial. Was any advice given to the Minister asking him to consider potential reputational impacts on the department, or likely controversy, or questions of the nature that we're considering here? Was anything shared with the Minister on that basis?
No.
Can you
I had no
why?
contact directly with the Minister. I received the press release. I mean, I think senior civil servants are called on every day of the week to take difficult decisions that are often controversial. I took this decision, Chair, based on the information that I had. I took it within the constraints that I, as Permanent Secretary, must operate. Of course, I regret any annoyance that's been caused as a result of the decision that I took. But whatever scenario I had opted for was going to be controversial. I believe that I acted with honesty and integrity. I think it was objective in doing that, and with impartiality. I accept that not everybody will agree with that, but these are difficult decisions, and I think senior civil servants like myself have to take those decisions on the basis of the information they have. But yes, of course, I was aware of the sensitivities.
Final question, aware of the sensitivities, were you concerned when the press release was issued that the department was being placed at risk of significant reputational damage?
I looked at the press release. I felt the press release was factual. I was aware that not everybody would be...
Not in terms of the content, but the context of where the Minister was in an occupied territory, given his previous comments around the issues which were highly politicised. Did that factor into any concerns that may have arisen about reputational
I absolutely
damage?
Was conscious that the decision I was taking when I was taking it would not be universally welcomed or accepted.
I'll bring my remarks to a close. I'll bring the Deputy Chair and ask other members just to indicate through the Clerk.
Thanks, Ronnie. And you say the threshold to refuse a request from the Minister is very high. Now, the fact that the school the Minister visited was in internationally recognised illegally occupied territory, and the fact that the two of the leaders of the regime that invited the ministers are subject to international arrest warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Do you not think that would have exceeded the threshold?
I was not aware of the specific location of the school when I took the decision that I did.
Check that? No.
Perhaps I should have, but I didn't ask the specific location of the school. I was aware that the Minister was in Israel. I was aware it was in Jerusalem. I didn't know the specific location of the school. In terms of the second part of your question, I didn't reflect on the politics of international arrest warrants.
Do you not think there's a moral issue there for the department and for yourself, that two of the leaders of that regime are wanted for crimes against humanity and war crimes? You think that's irrelevant?
That's not an issue, Pat, that I took into consideration. I was looking at this
I think you should have.
partially as
Do you think you should have taken it into account?
I could. Do I think, should I have taken what into account, the location of the school or the arrest
Both.
warrants?
Both?
I don't necessarily think it was for me to make a judgment in terms of the wider politics of all that was going
Politics, it's international law.
on. In terms,
It's the law, Ronnie. It's not politics, it's the law. International law. This is a legally occupied territory, and these leaders are wanted on arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. And you think that's irrelevant?
I looked at the visit to the school that the Minister had made. I looked at the press release. I assured myself that there was nothing in the press release of a political nature. I did not involve myself in the wider aspects that you're talking about.
I think you should have.
Had I have known the location of the school, it would have been a factor to take into account. But I'm not going to speculate on what I may or may not have decided. I'm here to give an account for what I did decide and the information that I did have.
You think you have a moral responsibility when it comes to making judgments about this particular issue?
I have not made judgments about this particular issue.
But do you not think you have a responsibility to make a moral judgment?
I don't think it's my role to make a moral judgment. I absolutely understand the sensitivities of what has gone on in Israel and in Gaza on both sides. I'm not making a moral judgment on either side.
Do you think it's right that the Minister went to visit a country which is responsible for the deaths of over 20,000 school children and the maiming and injury of tens of thousands of others, that has destroyed practically every school in Gaza, every university, what has become known as scholasticide? Did that not raise any sort of moral issues with you at all?
My heart goes out to people on both sides.
I'm not asking you about your heart going out to anybody. I'm asking you, did it not raise any moral issues?
I have to be allowed to answer the question.
Yeah, but you can answer it yes or no.
I'm answering the question and saying my heart goes out to everybody who has suffered in that part of the world, but it is not my role to judge a decision that the Minister made. Okay.
Has the Minister Department, has it any planning for any future visits to Israel?
There is an invitation. An invitation has been received by the Department for the Minister to visit a conference or to attend a conference in the new year. That has been recorded in the normal way. That will go out to officials for advice. I will certainly look at that before that advice goes to the Minister, and it will be a decision for the Minister.
Has there been any planning done for that trip?
There's been no planning done. The invitation was only received, I think, the day before yesterday. I couldn't be absolutely sure about that, but it's within the last couple of days. But it will be handled in line with normal procedure. Advice will be provided to the Minister. This is an official invitation. It will be dealt with in the normal way, and the Minister will ultimately make a decision.
Okay. Have any officials within the Department raised objections, or refused to take part in planning for any further trips to Israel?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
You're absolutely sure about that?
Not that I'm aware
You're
of.
You're unequivocal about that?
Not that I'm aware of.
You're the most senior official in the department.
Would
you expect, if an official raised objections or refused to take part in planning for another visit to Israel, that you would be informed about that?
I would expect that, yes.
And you're telling us unequivocally here now that nothing like that has happened?
I'm telling you unequivocally, no one has said to me or informed me that anyone in the department has refused to participate in planning. I mean, it may be, Pat, that somebody has, but I certainly, as I sit here, I'm not aware of that, and it hasn't been brought to my attention.
Right, and you're absolutely unequivocal about that.
I don't think I could be any clearer.
And one final question. If an official did refuse to participate in planning or raised objections about a proposed trip to Israel, how would they be treated?
Well, they'll be treated fairly. I mean, look, if that happens, if someone comes to me, I will discuss with that individual what the issue is. But you know, it hasn't happened, Pat. I've not been made aware of that. But if there is someone in the department, I'm more than happy for that person to come and talk to me about it.
Final word. This was a personal visit, yet you tell us that officials carried out 10 actions in preparation for that personal visit. Why were officials involved at all? If the minister had a personal invitation, should it not have been for him to respond and plan, and if he has any of his own party staff, to respond to all of that?
There were a small number, and I'm being honest and transparent.
You know
with
there
the
was a
committee.
small number. I'm
There's
asking you why there was a small number.
Well, I'm trying to say,
Yeah.
as I indicated in my opening remarks, there was a small number of activities that were involving the logistics and for the management of the minister's diary. That was what I found when I looked at it.
If it was personal, why were they involved?
Well, I can only tell you what happened.
But you give him a clean bill of health.
I'm telling you.
He came into the assembly the other day, said that the permanent secretary gave me a complete bill of health, but here now we're hearing officials were involved in planning for a personal trip.
Officials weren't involved in planning, they were involved
They carried out 10 actions.
in some logistical
We'll
issues.
draw to a close.
Why were they involved?
They were involved, as I've said.
Personal, it was nothing to do with officials. Would you accept it had nothing to do with officials?
Deputy Chair,
I've already said, Pat, it wasn't a departmental
If I could just
visit.
come in one
Sorry.
moment. So Pat, you're asking a question.
I'm not getting an answer,
So-
Chair.
so-
That's
so-
a different
so
answer.
I'm
Gary, it's not to do with you.
so
you get your
so
turn.
Deputy Chair,
You'll get your turn, Gary.
Deputy Chair, Deputy Chair, if I could just come in. I'd like to give the witness the opportunity to answer the question, and then we will have to draw to a close at that.
And it's a simple question. Why were departmental officials involved in any part of what we're being told was a personal trip, not in the context of Minister of Education?
And I have indicated to you that the reason that I have ascertained when I've looked at this was because there were some emails sent to the Minister's office that were passed on to the Minister. Those are the sorts of actions that I'm talking about. I'm not talking here about a huge amount of work. I'd indicated to the Minister initially that my estimate was probably somewhere less than an hour. I think going through all of the detail, it might be an hour, it might be a wee bit over an hour if you look at it and you do a generous calculation. But we're not talking here about, you know, the private office doing a huge amount of work on this. But there were emails that came from the embassy to the private office that were passed on to the Minister, for example. Those are the sorts of
But
things.
you did say in your opening remarks that they responded to some emails.
I said that they responded to, I think it was one issue, yes.
That's not passing it on to the Minister.
No, but I'm trying to give a context, Pat, and I'm trying to be honest with the committee in terms of exactly what happened and why.
But you haven't explained why an official would be responding to the Israeli embassy. It's not to do with the official. It's Minister's personal business.
So potentially that's for other members to pick up then in questions. Just before I bring the next member in, I could just ask if we could keep remarks through the chair. There's been a wee bit of back and forth across the room in terms of making sure people are getting their questions heard and that the witness has the scope to answer. Just to, if I could ask any remarks from members through the chair. Michelle, you'd indicated next.
You're next.
I'm sorry, I have it down here.
Oh, beg your pardon.
That's
Yeah, no, I
fine.
thought
Cara,
you
then
did.
you're next.
Thank you. Mr. Armour, thank you for being here today. I too feel confused by comments today. It wasn't departmental, this trip, but departmental staff was used with regards to logistics. Departmental channels were used to publicise the Minister's visit to the school, and departmental channels on social media were used to publicise the visit. The press release was cleared as it wasn't defined as political. But would you agree, Mr. Armour, that the trip itself is political by nature because of how divisive the ongoing, war, genocide that is taking place with Israel and Gaza? That didn't cross your mind at all?
I'm not going to be drawn into that. I'm here today to talk about the role that officials played. I'm doing that in an open and transparent way It's not for me to make judgments on the nature of the trip or the minister's intention in going on the trip. I'm simply here to give an account for what happened within the department.
At any point ahead of the minister visiting Israel, did anyone flag to him at any time or to yourself that this could be politically divisive? This could bring the education department, it would cause controversy?
No one flagged that to me. I certainly didn't flag that to the minister, and I'm not aware of anybody else that did, no.
Okay. This has caused, obviously, a lot of concern from teachers, from pupils, from the wider public in Northern Ireland. Has this debacle led to you and your department colleagues to reflect on sign-off processes? And if you were to go back in time, given the huge public outcry that we've all arguably received on this matter, would you do things differently, given how we know the public feel?
There are sign-off processes in place, and I've already explained to Mr. Sheehan. There is an invite in at the moment, which is an official invite, and that will be managed in the normal way. This was not an official invite to the department, and therefore those protocols weren't followed because it was an invite to a personal invite to the minister.
I'm just confused, given some of the images that I've seen whilst this minister was visiting Israel. There's an image of a Union Jack, an image of the Israeli flag, and then below there is a name tag of the minister's name, and underneath is his title, yet we're told that the department or his position wasn't mentioned throughout this trip. It's just so confusing what we're hearing from the department, from the minister, and images that we've seen online of him throughout this trip. Lastly,
if I can comment on that, I mean, I'm not responsible for a nameplate in front of the minister when he was on the trip, and I've been very clear about the role of the department. The department were not involved in this trip, with the exception, as I've been open with Mr. Sheehan, there were a small number of actions in the private office that were undertaken, but we, the department was not responsible for any of those social media posts or the name plaque.
Lastly then, just around just advice that you've given the minister, at any point did you think to contact the FCDO or the executive office for further approval ahead of his trip?
It wasn't an official trip, so no, I didn't do that.
Okay. Well, that's it for me. I'm content.
Okay, thank you, Cara. Danny, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair. Danny, you'll be aware that this Israeli regime, has killed a classroom of children for the last 2 years. Yet he visited a school in occupied territory. You're now saying that you weren't aware of where the location was when you signed off on that press statement, and then subsequently the social media that's went out there. Them posts are still live, they're still online. Should they not be retrospectively now looked at and taken down?
I wasn't aware of where the school was.
You're aware now?
Of course I'm aware now. I have not been involved in the politics of this, as I said to you. No, but sorry.
Retrospectively, are they going to be taken down?
But my role is to act in an impartial way. I'm not here to judge what happened on either side in Israel.
All due respect, you not knowing something at the time doesn't make it a right now. So you can take the stuff down if you really wanted to. So you're telling me the answer is no, they'll stay.
I have not considered taking the material down. No.
Okay, so thank you for your answer. Ronnie, you said about it would be controversial if you didn't go the other way. I would like you to explain that to me, because why would it be controversial unless the minister's going to maybe be a wee bit bullish about that if he doesn't get his own way? Would that be the case?
The minister hasn't been bullish with me in any way, shape or form.
If it was a visit for himself, but you promoted the visit, that made it ministerial, in my opinion. Of that's what is being perceived out there in the public. That's how it's being interpreted. So I don't understand how then, if you didn't promote it, who would be annoyed about it? Who would have been annoyed?
I'm very conscious of the significance of a decision to refuse a request from a minister and the constraints within which I operate.
That's all my answer is looking, because you're saying it would be the minister who would be annoyed, not I suspect you're responsible for the welfare of teachers, of pupils, of school leaders, and they are all angry right across the piece of what the department has done here. But you were more concerned about what a minister
No,
had asked
that's
for.
not what I said, Danny. I said there was a significance, and I think there would have been implications and no doubt ramifications right across the executive if I'd taken a decision to refuse a request from a minister. I've no doubt I would have been.
Is it a school and occupied?
I have no doubt.
Finish his point.
I have no doubt I would have been called to account for that. I have no doubt that there would have been people who would have said I was wrong for taking that decision. I took the decision that I thought was right. I stand over that decision, and I've explained, I hope, to the committee why I took that decision.
You also know now, you said you didn't know at the time where the visit was, but you do know now, and you're still standing over your decision.
I answered the question.
Yes,
but let me answer.
It's fine, Ronnie, because I don't have much time. Ronnie, I want to go into, you've said that you are considering a visit to Israel again, and that's came through for...
I said a request had been, an invitation had been received. The invitation has been logged in the normal way. It will go out to officials. They will consider. Advice will be provided to the minister. It will come through me, and the minister will make a decision as to whether or not he accepts that or not. That is the normal practice.
Maybe no practice. So there's no right now the visit. The minister has not made clear where he's going to visit.
There has been no decision. The advice hasn't been put to the minister. The invitation has only been received recently. It will go through, but there's no decision has been made on that yet.
Given the fact that the Assembly and the majority voted no confidence in the minister because of this particular visit, this committee also voted no confidence in the minister because of that. The public outcry that is there around the department advertising and promoting his visit, that would you consider giving him advice to actually take up this invitation?
Officials and I will look at the precise nature of the invitation. We will provide advice to the minister. I'm not going to preempt today what that advice will be because I haven't seen all of the detail yet. I haven't had an opportunity to consider that. We will provide advice to the minister. It will be a matter for the minister then to decide what he wants to do. But I'm not preempting what the advice will be, and I'm not preempting what the decision will be.
He can go against your advice and it can still be a ministerial visit to Israel?
I operate under the direction and control of the minister under Section 4 of the 1999 order.
I'm sure the public out there listening today will be even more worried at the fact that this minister is now considering going again, just to rub salt into the wounds.
Well,
considering this is the whitewashing.
But I think it's really important that we're clear. I didn't say the minister was considering it. I said an invitation has been received, that has been logged. It will be considered, and advice will be put to the minister.
The invitation would have been on the back of his visit, I assume?
Sorry?
That would have been on the back of his visit that he's already had?
I don't know the details other than he's been invited to attend a conference in Israel. I haven't seen, because it's only arrived in the department, I haven't seen the precise nature of it. That's why I'm not going to sit here and preempt what an outcome will be. That would be wrong of me to do that.
The new year, as in January, sorry, would that be January, February?
I think it's around February time, but I wouldn't want to be, I haven't seen the actual invitation, so I wouldn't want to be held to that, but I think it's February.
Gary, you'd indicated next.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ronnie, for trying to get the facts out there. Of course, we're used to people rewriting the past, but there's people now trying to rewrite the present and rewrite the facts, and that's obviously not going to be allowed. And most people, I think, have caught on to that. It is not your place to get involved in politics, or in terms of, it is politics, Pat, in terms of what you've said in relation to where the school was. The reality is there are people out there who are chanting from the river to the sea, and they couldn't tell you where the river is or the sea is. So it is not your role to adjudicate in that front. Again, don't interrupt, Pat, you had your opportunity.
You interrupted me,
and in terms
you interrupted me earlier when I was talking, so don't be a hypocrite.
So, Deputy Chair and Gary, just to pause, I think if we're going to have an evidence session that allows members to ask questions and the witness to give answers and to get important information on the public record, we're just going to need to ensure that we let members ask their questions and we don't have interventions from other quarters, and that applies to everybody around the table.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And in terms of, so we fully support the Minister's right to undertake a fact-finding mission, and I would encourage others to do that, because there's been figures bandied about. It's just not even accurate, and we'll not comment in terms of where those figures come from. Just to clarify, Ronnie, you had said, and the Minister answered in terms of the urgent oral, the initial question was around departmental resources. So just to confirm, you've said obviously this was at no cost to the public purse whatsoever, is that correct?
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And in terms of the time spent on this issue, obviously before he went and after he came back, in terms of his press release, roughly what time did you say?
I would think from looking at this, probably somewhere just north of an hour. Let's say 2 hours, just not to tire ourselves down in private office, and maybe an hour for the press release.
So it took me longer to drive here this morning, effectively, than it did in terms of the departmental resources. Let's put that into
somewhere between 2 and 3 hours.
To perspective,
At worst.
whenever. Yeah, okay. So the absolute minimal cost in that respect. In terms of the press release that was issued, it is very clear it is non-political. Can you talk us through in terms of the process? You mentioned EIS. So I have in front of me a press release that was issued by the Department for Economy through the Minister, and it is a very political statement in relation to Israeli trade. Now the only difference, of course, is that that's as I say, in relation to attacking Israel as opposed.
The Deputy Chair is raising a point of order.
I'm not sure what the Minister for the Economy has to do with this committee, and I'm not sure the Permanent Secretary in the Department of Education what responsibility he has for the Minister for the Economy.
If you listen, you'll find out.
I just can't understand
You
this
can't
kind of
understand
question.
it.
It's really irrelevant to what we're doing. I mean,
yeah.
people are talking about wasting time. This sounds like a bit of time wasting.
I think it's appropriate to let the member ask his question and obviously.
So the relevance is in terms of the hypocrisy point, because Ronnie, you've stated in terms of the processes that you go through, in terms of the role of EIS. So you're clear that this statement was non-political. So my point being is that did this go through EIS or all of the relevant procedures? And clearly it did come back with a clean bill of health. There was no issue, and this is a manufactured crisis.
I've explained to the committee my thought process and what I took into account in clearing that to go to the Minister. It then did follow the normal procedures and go to EIS.
Okay, and that came through. And just a final question, Chair. At no point did the Minister direct or instruct officials to do anything that was indicated or would come across as inappropriate or not befitting of a Minister to do?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. Cathy, you're next.
Thanks, Chair. Ronnie, can I clarify something? How many emails were sent to the Israeli embassy from the department?
I think it was mainly emails coming in from the Israeli embassy. There were around 10 actions in total. I don't have the specific number, but it's been very small in terms of the emails.
You said one to me, Ronnie.
I said, would clarify.
You said one.
I said one email.
Yeah, it went out to the Israeli embassy.
Yeah, but that's my understanding that there was.
Are you sure about that, or I change your mind?
I think it's Cathy's question here.
I know, but it's a point that the witness already answered to me earlier, and now he's saying he's not sure. So I think it's fair to
for clarity, Chair.
My conflict of interest here, David. I don't think you should even be in the room, to be honest.
I'm just going to speak here. In any other evidence session that we've held here in this committee, I've taken the view that members are free to ask whatever questions they wish, and that remains my position. So I don't think it's not for anybody here to be deciding what's in order or not. Ultimately, it's for the witness to decide if they want to ask. And if I feel something is being asked that is out of order and out of scope of this committee, I'll raise that. It's not helpful in terms of proceedings to have back and forth, because it means that the question and answer which is what gives us the evidence we're looking to hear, can't be heard. So if I could ask for members just to let the member that I've called ask their questions. If there are points at the end that anybody feels require clarification, I'm happy to give members the opportunity to do so at that stage. Cathy, I'll bring you back in.
Well, Chair, just a second. My declaration of interest was a question there. I think it's important that I give clarity to that. I think I was on a trip to Israel alongside a number of other public representatives from Northern Ireland, but this committee meeting is not considering the overall trip to Israel or my participation in the trip to Israel or Steve Aiken or others. participation in the trip to Israel. This is my understanding is that this session is about a minister's involvement in this and the appropriateness, therefore, of a minister's involvement in that trip and how that looked. It is not about my participation in the trip to Israel, so I think Pat's not correct in that.
You declared a conflict of interest at the start of the meeting.
Yes.
It was you who declared it.
I declared
if you have a conflict of interest, you shouldn't really be in the room, I think.
I said that I was on the trip to Israel. I don't think that my
The
participation.
agenda item was, has anybody a conflict of interest? And you said yes.
If I could ask both members to pause. I may bring the clerk in for clarification, but it is my understanding that that is a member's judgment to make as to whether they need to recuse themselves from the agenda item or not. Clerk, do you want to speak to that just in terms of procedure for clarification?
Sure. The item that was discussed earlier is declarations of interest, and that gives people the opportunity to put on the record anything that people may otherwise perceive to be a conflict, and that it's in the public domain and people can make their own judgment about as to whether it's a conflict or not.
Okay, so we'll return to Kathy's questions.
Can I go now, David?
I was responding to something that Pat had said. So
Same question again, Ronnie. How many emails? Can you clarify that point?
Sorry, if I can clarify, yes, there was the initial one, Pat, that I thought we were talking about earlier. There were then later contacts made by email asking for sort of flight details and things like that hadn't arrived through.
Okay. You mentioned 2 meetings, the school and a dinner, that you didn't deem as relevant meetings to be taking official notes or anything like that. How then were they seen as being relevant to go out on official department press statements? If they weren't relevant to take notes at from a official department,
Well, there was
how were they deemed?
The press release covered the visit to the school. It wasn't covering.
But it wasn't deemed relevant for an official to be there to take.
It wasn't deemed relevant under the provisions of the legislation. The legislation doesn't cover press releases. The legislation talks about relevant meetings at which official business was conducted. I had a conversation with the Minister on his return to find out what had happened during the school visit. If there had been concerns had been raised around the Functioning of Government Act, I think it was right and appropriate for me to go to the Minister and ask him precisely what had happened. I've given the committee an account of what the Minister explained to me about the visit to the school. He himself then said, look, there was a dinner, I was sitting next to someone. Just for clarity and transparency, I'm telling you that individual talked to me about the Israeli system briefly in Israel. It wasn't, in my view...
Okay, but that dinner didn't go out on official press statement?
No.
But the school visit did? But
No.
yet it wasn't deemed a relevant meeting?
But the press release wasn't about relevant meetings. The issue of relevant meetings...
It's about the school visit?
No, the issue of relevant meetings is as to whether or not the Functioning of Government Act had been breached. That's nothing to do with the press release.
Okay. I'm going to give you another chance, Ronnie. You said you weren't aware of the location of the school. Well, you have another chance to answer that. Had you been aware of the location of the school, would you have made a different decision?
I wasn't aware, as I've said.
I know, but that's not the question.
Sorry, but I have to be allowed to give my answer.
But that's not the question, Ronnie. The question is, would you make a different decision?
I'm going to answer your question. I wasn't aware of it, and I'm not going to speculate now as to what I would or would not have done.
Okay.
I'm here today to give an account for what I did do, not what I might have done.
Okay, so we know that there are a number of schools that have requested the Minister, a number of schools here that have requested a visit from the Minister, and he's declined them. He hasn't went to a number of schools that have requested him to come, yet he seems to have found time to visit a school in a legally occupied territory. What message do you think that sends to school leaders here? And how do you expect them to have confidence in the Minister?
I think the Minister has visited a very significant number of schools since his appointment. It's not, and I'm not here to defend the Minister, but it's not always possible to accept every invitation that comes to him, and there may be a variety of reasons for that. the Minister didn't make this visit here. He made this visit when he was on the trip. I don't think it's a direct read across, and I would hope that people wouldn't see it in that way, because there will have been reasons why he turned down visits to schools here.
Okay, you hope that they wouldn't see it that way, Ronnie. I can tell you that they do.
Well,
Many do.
I regret if they do. I'm sorry they do.
Just a final point,
You have
Catherine.
said, I think maybe 5 or 6 times now, you have referenced the word impartiality.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe, I'm not asking your political views, but do you believe that there's a regime that has been accused of genocide? There's a school visit in a illegally occupied territory. Do you believe that there's a political nature? Like, you would have to live under a rock to not realise that this was a political issue that is being debated. Again, not asking your political view, but is it political?
I am here today to talk about the role of officials. I believe officials acted with impartiality, and that I acted with impartiality.
You believe
Final comment, Catherine.
that on this the political scale and the political nature of this, that you can stand over and you can use the word impartiality?
I believe that I acted with impartiality. I looked at the information before me within the constraints that I have to operate. I made a decision. I think I've been as transparent with this committee as I can be as to my thought process. I absolutely recognise that not everybody will agree with that decision. And I
recognise that it's political.
No, I'm not saying it's political. I'm saying I recognise that not everybody will agree with the decision that I took, and I respect that.
We'll draw that to a close at that point. John, you'd indicated next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, to the witness, I want to express considerable empathy. I think you are embroiled in a political dispute that probably reflects upon our own dysfunctional politics in Northern Ireland. And I want to say at the outset, we're again dealing with this issue in Israel. I've received correspondence today that there are 33 special needs and non-special needs children in a school in Northern Ireland are going to spend 2 weeks at home because their classroom is infested with black mould that hasn't been dealt with. So I just think we should be focusing on those issues. But anyway, I'll move on to this issue of the visit. You explained that a number of hours were spent doing some preparatory work, and it seemed to me to be fairly perfunctory things like making sure there was permission for phone security and clearing the diary of the minister. I would envisage, and I don't know because I've never been a minister, that if a minister, and let's say, for example, because I know the Sinn Féin members were asking this and don't want to bring party politics into it, but if a Sinn Féin minister or any other minister was saying, look, I'm away to Portugal in 2 weeks' time for a holiday, that officials may there still be involved in amending diaries and getting security permissions for phones, etc. Would that be accurate?
That would be absolutely accurate, yes.
So there was nothing different about preparing for this visit. And that's not me giving a judgment on it. I'm just simply saying that any minister who goes on holiday isn't going to be in the country and needs some diary management and phone security issues. So just to say that.
The same would apply to a senior civil servant or any civil servant who's taking their IT devices out of the country. There is a process that has to be followed, irrespective of whether that's on official business or on holiday. I took my device with me on holiday, and you have to have permission to do that.
Likewise, I took mine to Verona. As beautiful as it was, I got an hour's work done in the morning, even though it was an annual leave, and my staff organised permission for that.
Okay.
So I just want to put that in the record because I think some of the questioning was unfair, to be frank, especially when you're asked for yes or no questions from people who rarely answer yes or no themselves, and they're politicians. So moving on, and I want to have some learning from this rather than trying to get a scalp, which so many people tend to do in our politics. Let me just get this clear. So you make a minister asks for something to be done, and that's the press release. You interpret the request under the threshold of the legislation that outlines what a civil servant could do for a minister, and you said there's a very high threshold for saying no. But also, in many ways, the request was coming from the minister as a private citizen because he wasn't there on official business. Now, let me be clear, this is really complex stuff because, and I know in any public role, you know, if I was on holiday when I was held a senior rank in the police, I might have asked someone to do something at home. They're saying it, yes, you're on holiday, but you're also my boss and you're going to ask me to do something. So looking forward, I would just want to ask some questions to see if we can make sure we can deconflict these things so we don't get embroiled in another argument again. And that is this. Is there any clarity in any directions you're given from the head of the civil service about deconflicting these issues? Is there training in when you can say no to the minister? And I don't just mean policy or law. Is there actually training? Is there guidance for anyone around deconflicting whenever you're a minister or a senior office holder, but actually you're on holiday or you're doing something personal about what you can or cannot ask for?
I've certainly not received training, and I'm not aware of training. I suppose you know, when you get to the senior civil service, you know, you have a lot of experience below your belt by that stage. I think you know what the legislative requirements are. I mean, I'm very familiar with the constraints in which I operate. Very familiar with the legislation. I'm very clear that I act under the direction and control of the minister, but that I also have that line management responsibility to the head of the civil service. But I'm not aware of formal training as such.
Yeah, could I just put on the record, I think there is something for clarity going forward, that there is some ethical guidelines that enable us to delineate better both those who hold ministerial office and those who service them, what these distinctions are, because this is the sort of thing can crop up again. And it could, of course, be someone from a different political persuasion doing a visit somewhere else. And I just think, yes, we can argue about this, but I do think there is certain grey areas, such as I've just identified, that the minister was there as a private citizen. But of course, when you make a request, the person receiving that request is considering their responsibility to answer it based on legislation that determines what a civil servant should do for a minister. And that's often grey areas that just could be hammered out and clarified.
Just to bring this to a close, John, of the final point, really, we're out of time.
Yeah, that really is my main observation, and I do feel it is really disappointing that we've spent so much time rehearsing this issue, which we know we're not going to agree on, whilst we have schools crumbling and so many issues to be sorted. And I'm disappointed and I feel sorry for your department that has been put in the crosshairs of a political argument that wasn't of your making, whichever way you interpret this saga.
Thank you, John. Michelle, you'd indicated.
Thank you, Chair. Just actually continuing John's point there about the time we're spending on this issue. So we're spending time on this issue because the minister chose to take a trip. You told us that ministerial engagements were cancelled, presumably educationally related engagements were cancelled to facilitate the trip. So what engagements were cancelled to allow the minister to go to Israel?
Well, I mean, the minister went during the half-term break. So, you know, when I say engagements were cancelled, you know, I don't really overstate that, because there weren't engagements during the half-term break as such. He went, I think, on the Thursday. I mean, I'm not clear specifically what he had at this point in time in his diary on the Thursday, but there may have had to be things moved. Perhaps adjusted might have been a better word than cancelled. So sorry if I confused you with the word cancelled, but adjusted might have been a better phrase.
He made a judgment that he was happy to focus on this trip and cancel things connected to education. I don't think it's unreasonable for us to have this conversation.
I think I think let's be clear. I used the word cancellation. Maybe that wasn't the best word to use. But
You couldn't be two places at once. So
but the
whatever was
minute,
in the
well,
diary,
but
you didn't
but
go to.
there was no official engagements in the diary for the week that the assembly wasn't sitting. I mean, schools weren't open, so he wasn't visiting schools that week when it was the half-term break. There will have been some adjustments, I suspect, on the Thursday before half-term. But I think, in fairness, cancellation probably wasn't the right word to use.
But I don't think it's at all a waste of our time. I think having confidence that there is political neutrality within our departments is, when there's a question, and I think very legitimate questions, that there's a blurring of the lines in that. It's more than reasonable that we interrogate that. You seem quite relaxed that something was posted on departmental website when the Minister was acting in a personal capacity. Can he now use those channels to publicise any trip or visit that he takes in a personal capacity?
I don't think it's fair to say I'm quite relaxed. I haven't been relaxed about any of this. I've come here today to talk about the decision that was made. I don't think it is a fair representation to say. It sounds like I've dealt with this in a casual manner.
No,
I can assure you I haven't dealt with this in a casual
can
manner.
the Minister use those channels for visits that he takes in a personal capacity? He did in this instance, so can he do that going forward?
He asked for a press release to be issued in relation to a visit to a school that he made.
In a personal capacity.
Yes, I'm not arguing that, but I don't think I can sit here and say we could use it just generally for anything in a personal capacity. I think he visited a school. He asked for that.
Territory in a very controversial setting.
I made that assessment, and I've explained how I made that assessment.
You can see the difference between him just visiting a school locally and then going to an occupied territory and visiting a school in Israel. Probably would have raised red flags that might have been paused for. I don't think that's probably the right way to use departmental channels which represent all of us.
I can understand the feeling that has been expressed around the table in relation to that, but I can only give an account for what I did and what others did. It's not for me to make judgments in terms of the views of others on these things.
So there's a lot of dancing on the head of a pin, I think, around as well the content of the post. Inherently, it was a political visit. Therefore, anything that was posted reflecting that visit was inherently political. I don't think that can really be disputed. And again, I think there is a question around judgment here that I would expect the most senior official in the department, in the most controversial space that we could imagine politically, to not raise those red flags and not make clear advice that we're going to put our people in a really difficult place here if we do this. And the Minister has his own communication channels. He has his own Facebook, his own Twitter, his own Instagram, I'm sure, where he could have posted that and not dragged you guys into this. So I think there is a question here around the judgment that we expect from our senior officials and from the departments when it comes to these really, really, really highly charged issues.
And I think it's important in making that judgment to look at the constraints within which officials make those decisions.
Okay. Do you
just be a final point.
Okay, very last point then. In light of all of this, do you accept that your clean bill of health, you being the Minister's Permanent Secretary, around all of this probably isn't going to satisfy the public, that there's nothing to see here?
I have been as open and transparent with the committee as I could. I've talked you through what happened, and I've talked you through the decision-making process that I undertook. I'm not under any illusions that I suspect there will be people who are not satisfied with that, but I can only tell you what happened, what I did, and why I did it, and that's what I've tried to do today, and as open a way as I hope I could.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Michelle and David.
Thank you very much, Chair. And Ronnie, I want to thank you for being here today and for your evidence so far, which is helpful. You are caught in a storm. I think that has more than just some of the logistics at play, but wider politics too. I think it was interesting to hear concerns from an Alliance member around the Minister being away for a week whenever we've had an Alliance Minister take a week's holiday during the time of
Wasn't in a
Assembly.
genocidal state.
So, there's the very issue. The issue is where you
Legally
travel to.
occupied
rather than anything else.
territory.
Members, David, I'm just going
What
to...
I would say-
again, I think I've made it really clear that if we're going to conduct this session in a way that is helpful, that we need to give members the space to ask their questions without voices from other members. So if we just I think I've been fair to all members on that front, and I want to keep that consistent. David.
Thanks, Chair, and I'm not actually intending to criticise the Minister or personal business, but I think if we're going to be churlish about these issues, we have to be consistent. Ronnie, I just wanted to run through a few questions. I accept that you probably covered a lot of these in your presentation, but just as we come to the end, I think it's worth reiterating some of them. Firstly, some MLAs have raised the issue, as you know, when you mentioned the Functioning of Government Act. Can you confirm that it was your assessment that the test of relevant meetings was not met for any engagement on the Minister's trip to Israel, and therefore those provisions of the Functioning of Government Act were not engaged?
I can confirm I discussed that with the Minister on the basis of information he provided to me in answer to the questions I asked, that was my view, yes.
Thank you. Secondly, can you confirm that you approved the press release, and I think you have done, before it was issued, and as you were satisfied that it was appropriate in all of the circumstances that you have laid out? And I might go a bit further than that and just ask, at no time, whenever you said that the Minister had made the request for that to be released, at no time did officials raise with him concerns that it would be inappropriate to release that?
I didn't raise concerns with the Minister. I've explained to the committee the thought process that I undertook.
Yep.
I approved for the reasons I've explained, and I take responsibility for approving that, yes.
Yeah, and I think that's reasonable. Thank you very much, Ronnie. And just thirdly, can you confirm before the Minister answered the urgent oral in the Assembly last Monday that you indicated to him that you had assessed the role of the Department in assisting the organisation of the trip and concluded that the limited involvement of the Department was appropriate?
I met the Minister. I indicated to the Minister that from the initial look that I'd had, that the role of the department was minimal, and I hadn't seen anything that was inappropriate, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think those logistical things, even Assembly members, whenever they travel abroad, will ask, for certain arrangements to be made so that if they need to answer emails or do things across there, I think that's perfectly normal. I thank you for your contribution. I would say as well, I think it's relevant that was mentioned earlier, we've probably spent far more time since the Minister's returned from this visit than the Department spent. And I'm sure the Department has spent much more time on it since he returned than when he was there. And so it's important we recognise. It was said earlier that that was because the Minister travelled to Israel. No, that's because of requests and demands from members, and they may be appropriate. But the time, if we're going to worry about the time spent on this issue, it's time spent because members have chosen to have that time spent by the Department on it. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, David. I think I just wanted to make a point. I have a couple of other things I just want to raise with Ronnie. I mean, I think if the committee is not appropriate when it looks at the department to ensure that all the relevant governance procedures are properly in place, then we're not doing our job. So, we have to make sure the processes are followed. Our whole structure of government operates around the independence of the civil service and those clear lines between ministers, their politics, and the advice of officials. So I have absolutely no qualms with the committee spending time looking at this. I think it's entirely appropriate, and that would be my view. I just wanted to clarify just one point of fact, Ronnie, and it's just maybe you may or may not be aware. Can you confirm the date that the Minister received the invite, or if not, what date he made the department aware of that invite?
The initial one,
the
or the one
initial
that's just
invite
come
from the
in?
Israeli
The
embassy.
invite was received, I think, on the 15th of September.
That's helpful. Yeah, I'll certainly bring you in a moment.
Do you know what date he accepted the opportunity to go on the trip? If the email was received on the 15th, what date he accepted?
Let me just give me a second. I should hopefully be able. I think it was the 17th or 18th. It was one of those days, I think, but I can't just be 100% sure.
Thank you for clarifying.
It's important just to clarify that for the timeline. The other question I have, just very briefly, is, and I think you answered this in your evidence, but I want to be clear. No consideration given of publishing your findings in relation to this when you were asked to look at it by the Minister?
The work I was asked to do by the head of the Civil Service, the request came private and confidential, and it went back private and confidential. It was never my intention to publish that. I think it is right that I'm held to account by this committee, which I think I have been this afternoon, but that I'm also held to account by the head of the Civil Service, and I provided her with the information she asked for, and I hope I provided you with the information. It's the same information.
And finally then, in terms of the head of civil service, are there any processes still live in terms of looking at the departmental involvement in this trip at any level that exists at head of civil service level or elsewhere?
I provided the head of the civil service with the information she asked for in order, I think, to allow her to respond to those who raised concerns with her.
Thank you. Well, I think that were you looking to come in, Deputy Chair? Sorry, I wasn't sure.
No, we can deal with it after the.
Okay. Well, that
after
brings
the witness leaves.
Yeah, that brings the evidence session to a close. So members can we can then have a conversation if there's any actions arising.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, Ronnie. So look, I'm happy to open up to members. Very, very conscious of time here. I'm going to give credit to members, despite the fact that it was quite a difficult session to navigate. Everybody did actually stick to their time fairly well, so we were chasing our tail from the outset. So look, I'm happy to open up to members and bring the
Sure. I mean, I think there are some actions coming out of this, and I think we should be writing to the department, asking them for the precise number of actions that the departmental officials were involved in, how many emails were sent to the Israeli embassy, what travel logistics that you see. There were a lot of questions came out of the evidence the witness gave. He said, first of all, there was only one short email returned to the Israeli embassy, and then on further questioning from Cathy, he said there was communication around travel logistics. So I think we need to drill down and unpick all of that as to what has happened there. Secondly, he was unable to answer whether or not any official had objected to or refused to take part in planning for a trip to Israel. He said he's not aware of it, but it may have happened that didn't know about or whatever. And I think we should ask the department for information on that. And just on the point, I think it was John raised, that if a Sinn Féin minister was going on holiday, that the officials might rearrange a diary or whatever. That may well be the case, but I don't think that officials would be communicating with a travel agent or organising the travel logistics for a Sinn Féin minister, and they shouldn't be, whether it's a Sinn Féin minister or any other minister. So just to put that point on the record as well.
Right, Guy, just come in there.
Yeah, but just briefly, John, we have another evidence session. I would remind all members of that, but yes, John, please come in.
Well, I will be asking questions then of all the ministers. In fact, I might ask it, I'll find a way of asking it, because Pat was very clear. He was questioning the amount of time spent, and the witness was clear that a lot of that was simply rearranging diaries and also sorting out the security for phones. So I'll find out, because if he's telling me that whenever the First Minister goes on holiday, that she is up with Rick's team in IS sorting out her phone security, I'd be interested to know that. I wouldn't expect ministers to spend their really valuable time doing those mundane but important jobs, but I'm going to find out since the minister since Pat has raised it.
Good man, that's your job.
Okay.
It is, and I'll never stop doing it. Thanks, Pat.
Good lad.
So members should check if there's anything else.
Call me John, by the way.
I'm certainly content to consent to those actions that the deputy chair has suggested. Or any other views?
Can I suggest, Chair, that we don't call each other lad as well?
Yeah.
I find it actually, I'll not call lass or lad, to anyone in this. We're actually an important business. So good lad is just disrespectful and dismissive.
Yeah.
I'm not going to happen from anyone, and I don't address anyone in those terms, Pat.
Okay, but you were calling us cancer last week,
Okay.
so there's a bit of a difference there, I think.
Okay.
You know,
Public don't need to see this nonsense.
if you agree to refrain from that, I won't call you a lad anymore. How's that? Can we agree on that?
Deputy Chair,
Can we agree on that?
Deputy Chair,
No?
I'm just
Okay.
going to come in here. So look, I think I'm not going to speak to what anybody says out of this room. That's well outside of my remit. But within this room, I think we should ensure that how we address each other is appropriately courteous and respectful. So
Well,
I think that's
Chair, if you don't mind me saying, the member actually doubled down on what he said in the committee here last week. So he said it twice, not just once.
so. I'll draw a line under that at this stage. Gary, you had indicated, and then Cara.
It was only just to, I suppose, say that in terms of the additional questions that Pat's asking for, I don't see a need, to be honest, to write, because if anybody listens back, first of all, it was farcical, but in terms of Ronnie's contribution, I think it was very factual. And if people listen back, I specifically asked him the question, did anybody in his department, were they asked to do anything inappropriate? And he said no. Did anybody refuse to do anything that he asked? And he said no. And in terms of the point around the admin, my understanding, and I know it's a political point, and David raised it in terms of the Justice Minister being in the Caribbean during sitting time. Whenever a minister is out of the country, it is appropriate that the private office is involved, because, and even in terms of flight times, because it's not the first time that a minister has come back into the country and has had a meeting that night, or prior to going, had a meeting in the morning. So my understanding in terms of admin time, this, if somebody spends an hour on admin,
Gary, all due respect,
that
that's
is
not what Pat was asking. Pat was asking about the visit that could be coming up.
right, well, that's not what I picked up in terms of, but I think the fact that the invite's only in, I don't think there'd be much time spent.
I suppose, Gary, the other issue is, it's not for departmental officials to organise travel logistics for personal trips.
But the invite that came in wasn't a personal trip. The next
No, I'm
invite
not
you're
talking
saying,
about. I'm not
so
talking
you're
about
both
that. I'm
mixed
talking
up,
about the
right?
previous
So you're talking about the last one.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. So that's
No, but
That's the point. So was any
I couldn't see there'd be any disagreement around this table that departmental officials shouldn't be organising travel logistics for personal trips. Yet the Permanent Secretary said that was happening.
Okay, so if I've understood.
So, I mean,
just to clarify your request, the Deputy Chair, so my understanding of the Deputy Chair's request, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, was that in relation to the trip that has taken place, it is around what specifically administrative tasks were carried out within the department to facilitate that trip. And then the second point is around the upcoming request for a visit to Israel. To ask in writing, has there been any officials who have expressed dissatisfaction or dissent in relation to agreeing to that trip,
Objected to
or involving themselves in arranging it?
Can I just add a point of clarity? I'd like to know, the Minister made a passionate statement about the IDF on October 13th, and we're told it was the 15th he was invited by the Israeli government to come to Israel for a paid trip. Is there any mechanism for us to explore if he had any prior knowledge prior to the 15th in the email that was given that he would be offered a paid trip, or if the two are connected in any way? I just thought it was a strange comment that he had made.
I'm
interesting point.
I'm concerned that we don't stray into territory that could relate to matters outside the committee's remit in terms of if there was any.
I'm happy to do so on my own record.
Yeah, and I'm wondering whether some of that may be for individual members. But if they're if we're straying into the territory around standards, commissioner complaints and those sorts of issues, that's not for this committee to investigate. So, Clerk, is there anything you could speak to just to keep us right procedurally on that?
Procedurally about asking
specifically
around date. Like, I think there is, the witness has given evidence about the initial date. I mean, it seemed to be that the invite was received, that date was quite firm in the witness's mind, but he wasn't entirely sure about the acceptance, whether it was the 17th or 18th, so you could certainly maybe ask for clarification.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so in my own capacity, just a point of clarity.
I mean, I'm content in terms of a timeline, in terms of a date of invite and a date of acceptance or date of notification to the department, that it helps us form a timeline if it seems reasonable, if members are agreed. But I think we wouldn't want to stray into necessarily investigating individual members or indeed ministers' conduct. That's not a function of this committee. Okay. Are we agreed on those actions, members? Anything else?
Right.
Agreed. Okay. So that concludes that item. So look, I'm conscious of time. I'm conscious that members may want a comfort break. I'm going to make a decision here that may be unpopular, that we may wish to maintain quorum and stagger comfort breaks so we can proceed with business. If we can do that.
Sure, I'm going to have to leave.
Yeah.
I'm the same. I've got another appointment at 5:30. I just need to go to.
I'm going to move on to item 8, and if we can just be mindful of quorum so we can continue with business. So item 8 then is,
I'll wait till someone come back if you want.
does the clerk need a comfort break? The key. If the clerk needs a comfort break, we know if the clerk needs a comfort break, we'll take a few minutes because we can't
I was
proceed.
putting my hand up to tell him what was
I
quorum.
think it might be simpler.
Short comfort break. We do need the clerk in the room. So closed session. Okay, members, that's us back in open session after some debate around the appropriate way to manage a comfort break. We're on to item 8 on the agenda, and it's an in-year monitoring, resource and capital budget update from Department of Education officials. So I'd refer members to the briefing notes from the committee clerk, page 40, and correspondence from the Committee for Finance at pages 43 and 53, and also in your tabled papers there is additional material sent through by the department. Now we are having an issue with the tech in the room, so we're going to have I think some difficulty sharing some slides that the officials wanted to share, but we do have those. Hopefully we can maybe have those shared with members directly and take that from there. So I'll welcome the officials here. Joining us, we have Neil Palmer, Finance Director in the department, Stephen Van Houten, Acting Deputy Director of Finance in the department, Seamus Gallagher, Acting Grade 5, Investment and Infrastructure in the department, and Stephen Creagh, Deputy Director of Investment and Infrastructure in the department. So you are all very welcome, and sincere apologies for the lateness in getting to your evidence session, and we really do appreciate your patience with that, and we'll try and be succinct and concise in our questioning this afternoon. So look, I'm just happy to hand over to yourselves at this stage for any opening presentation you do want to make. Apologies if the lack of access to a screen will make any of that difficult, but over to yourselves for initial presentation.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for having us today. I have a few slides which I'll just talk you through. I won't dwell on them too long, and we'll be keen to ask questions. I suppose just to kick off, I think this was billed as an October monitoring update, but as you'll all know, there's no longer an October monitoring round. It'll be December monitoring round, when we're not actually allowed to bid for resource in that round, but I'll come to that at a point in time. We are allowed to bid for capital. So, look, just to set the scene, these are figures that you'll be fairly familiar with by now. We started 2025-26 with an opening budget of 3,227.8 million. Even before June monitoring, the Finance Minister had made a promise on certain additional elements of funding, so he had pre-committed to an additional 15 million for SEN pressures, and in the end at June monitoring we got 27.3, which we're really grateful to get. And likewise, we'd already had a commitment to give us 17.9 million for employers' national insurance contribution pressures. Again, whilst the 17.9 is obviously very welcome, it was nowhere near the 50 odd that we needed, but that feels like such a long time ago now. In addition, we got another 8.1 million for block grant non-SEN pressures, and we got the 55 million for childcare, which we knew was on the way, so we got that at June monitoring, which is also great news. So what that brings us to now at this point in time is a resource DEL budget of 338.8 million, so roughly 3.34 billion, which sounds like a lot, but sadly it's not enough. So at this point in time, again, you'll be fairly familiar with these figures. Whilst the department and our smaller ALBs are forecasting to live within budget, the EA at this point in time is forecasting to overspend in the region of circa £300 million. Now, we do have some small pockets that we hold back, and that's just through prudence, which we've informed the EA of, which we will hopefully allocate to them in full. So that brings our pressure in the round to about circa 280 odd million. Which is quite a concern at this point in time, given that we're getting a very stark message from Treasury and finance colleagues that there's no additional funding coming. And in addition, at the start of the year, we had another £41 million of what we would have called high priority or desirable pressures. I think at this point in the year, we just need to forget about those and focus on trying to minimise our forecast overspend. In terms of actions to achieve savings, as in how are we going to live within budget, you'll have heard before we're quite hamstrung in education. A large proportion of our budget is on staff costs, and unless we get a pot for voluntary redundancies, we're looking at compulsory redundancies, which no one would want to go anywhere near. And unfortunately, at this point of time in the year, to be able to action the amount of redundancies that we would need to live within budget would be impossible. And I'll come back to a little bit more on that to give you some context. And then in terms of looking at the education budget as a whole, if you want to separate out what elements are non-staff related, there's about 550 million which would be non-staff related, but that's everything from transport to school meals, your bills, your lighting, your heating, your materials. So there's not an awful lot of scope for us at short notice to find 280 odd million pounds. So yes, I already talked about needing an extensive redundancy programme. If at this point in the year we were realistically going to say, right, we're going to get rid of staff, we're going to live within budget, to save circa 300 million pounds, and actually it probably would have been more from the start of the academic year, you'd be looking at losing over a quarter of our teaching staff and about 10% of our non-teaching workforce, which is not something that I think we really want to contemplate. And all of that would have to be compulsory. So to continue on with actions to make savings, so it's not, the department hasn't been sitting on its hands. Obviously over the last number of years we've made some really difficult decisions in terms of, we've stopped some programmes, the likes of Engage springs to mind, Holiday Hunger, Happy Healthy Minds. We've made some very difficult decisions in cutting budgets for our ALBs, or at least not meeting their needs, potentially to even meet their statutory requirements. And alongside that, there's a number of initiatives within the department, such as managing staffing vacancies and controls around that to ensure that we do our best to live within our budgets. Now, on top, the EA had already identified about £15.6 million worth of savings in this financial year and has implemented about 9.1 of those already. In addition, following recent engagement with our finance colleagues and Treasury, you'll be well aware of the EA's announcement last week where they're going to introduce some more efficiencies, which will hopefully take the 15.6 to about £30 million. And those are very difficult things to do, but it's the increase in the price of a school meal by 50 pence. It's charging, well, there are savings associated with the music service, the most likely of which, the most real one, is to introduce charges for music services. There's halting referrals to external providers for EOTIS, so those will all be now done internally within the EA. And then also a bit of work which was already ongoing around looking at savings in home-to-school transport, particularly around taxis, and introducing a cap in that area. There had been an announcement on maintenance, and I have my capital colleagues with me today who'll be able to elaborate on that. I think it was probably an unrealistic proposal to stop all maintenance, so we'll have a further update for that down the line. I suppose just to put it into context as well while we're looking at it, and I will get to the end very quickly, we're looking at this year at about 280 million at this point in time, and we're going to work really hard to try and bring that down, because even if we can't get it down to zero, which I can tell you now confidently we will not without additional funding, that will roll forward into next year, which you all know, so that just increases the pressures, and it was what an already eye-watering year for us next year. And in previous years, like for example in 23-24, I think we got about 480 million additional funding in year, which allowed us and the EA to live within budget. Similarly, I think in 24-25 we got about 600 odd, maybe more, 600 odd million, again, which allowed us and the EA to live within budget. So looking ahead then, I mentioned next year, so 26-27 and onwards to 28-29. We did submit some evidence to the committee a while ago, which set out some of the figures that we'd pulled together. Initial projections against the baseline budget that we'd been given to work against by DOF were a shortfall of 850 million in the next financial year, increasing to 1.3 billion in 28-29. And obviously if there's an element of, I think at block grant level, we're forecasting to overspend by about 700 million at the minute. If all of our own overspend or an element of our own overspend, it gets carried forward into next year against us, it just makes that task even more eye-watering, to be honest. Now, I suppose, and again, I'll try and keep it brief, we're, at this point in time, I'm trying to engage with our senior management team to not accept that we can't live within budget this year, but to continue to do what we can, but realistically, we have to accept that we need to look forward, we need to look at future years, we need to start introducing factors now that are going to start to produce some savings or some efficiency across the next 2 or 3 years, instead of waiting in year to find out what our shortfall is, saying this is too difficult, we can't cope with this in year. and hoping to get bailed out. So 3 key areas that we've started looking at, although it's sort of moved on a little bit since then, is workforce planning, SEN, which is just increasing at a frightening trajectory, and home to school transport. But it needs to go a bit wider than that, and we've started discussions internally, basically looking across all areas, and we've engaged as a senior management team and noted a large number of key areas that we think need to take a look at, and we'll be engaging more closely with the EA in the coming weeks on that. So that's resource. Sorry to my capital colleagues, I've really focused on resource, but just a very, very quick capital update. In 25-26, the opening capital budget was about 388 million. Now, within that, there was 102 million earmarked for Stroll and 60 million earmarked for Fresh Start. At June monitoring, we got an additional 12 in capital, so that brings the current budget to circa 400 million, against which there's a shortfall at this point in time of about 22 million. And my colleagues can give you more detail on that if you need it. In terms of future years, we do the capital budget slightly differently, where they don't get a baseline, they just get what is the ask, what do you need for the next 4 years. So bearing in mind that this year's budget at 400 million is the biggest overall capital budget we've ever had. Our forecast need for 26-27 is about 730 million, increasing to 676 million the next year, and then 822 million the year after that, and then 703 million in the final year. So you're talking for the next 3 or 4 years in and around 700 or 800 million, which is almost twice as much as we currently have this year. So I will leave it at that. Apologies for taking so long. You'll be keen to ask questions.
It didn't take overly long at all, and I appreciate you trying to be brief. But there's a lot to cover in this. I wanted to ask just around, and I know this is, but there's a really real short-term pressure here, and we'll come to that. I think maybe pressure doesn't quite cut it. I mean, you're pretty clear. Current trajectory, you're going to overspend, and quite substantially. So like that's pretty clear. But just in terms of that wider piece, because I don't think anybody in the room would accept that education just runs like a well-oiled machine, and that everything's become more expensive. Therefore, you're going to be overcommitted every year. There's undoubtedly going to be structural things in our system that drive costs or statutory duties that could maybe be delivered more effectively. So it's just to get a sense of what is really on the agenda there in terms of because I think it's not something we can just put off to do that structural work. So what is happening around that? I mean, things that would occur to me, estate management in terms of how you manage the school estate, whether the school estate is fit for purpose, whether it is the right size. I mean, look into the recommendations in the independent review. Things like the post-primary transfer that drive those transfer costs as kids leave where they live to go to schools all over the place. Sustainability of the school estate in terms of the size of the schools we have. All of that stuff, none of which is easy, difficult stuff. But what's happening in that space? What work is actually underway to deal with this, so that we can be confident in future rounds of this process that we know there's work going on to deal with some of that structural stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm not able to cover each of those areas in any great detail, obviously, because I'm looking at it from a financial perspective. But what I can tell you is just further to what I was saying towards the end there, where we'd started off initially looking at, okay, what are some of our key areas of spend where we think in the short to long term or short to medium term we can start making change now, which will give us some longer term savings. So those 3 key areas that we mentioned initially were around workforce, SEN and transport. And each of our colleagues in those areas have gone away to look at, okay, if we need to make serious structural changes here to create efficiencies, we need to present a paper about what we need to, and that's where we're at the minute. That hasn't progressed beyond that at this point in time. But what I can say is, though, certainly a recognition on my part and on the finance directorate's side that that's not enough. We need to look much wider. And there is a long list that we'll be discussing going forward, and a lot of those things that you mentioned are on that list. So you're looking at sustainable schools. You're looking at every area. You're looking at the financial accountability of all schools, and that whole process of how schools are funded and how they're managed. You'll be looking at everything. Youth, even some of the smaller programs, extended schools, entitlement frameworks, Sure Start. I think we need to look at everything across the board, and that's not to say that we're threatening to just stop something to save money. It's to look at, can we combine programs? Can we look at working with other departments? Are we accessing all funding streams? So apologies, I can't give you any great detail. And in terms of the estate, now I know there was a PIC recently. I don't know if either of my capital colleagues want to interject.
Chair, thank you. Obviously we had the Northern Ireland Audit Office report on the management of the school estate, followed by a Public Accounts Committee hearing and subsequent report, which we're working through our part input to the memorandum reply on. We were very grateful to the Audit Office for flagging a number of the issues and bringing them into focus. The key themes generally centre around what the comments you made in your introduction there, the need for an overarching estate strategy. We have many component parts and many things in train across our various programme streams, but we need to corral them together. Work's going on in that regard, and we have a commitment both to the Audit Office and a commitment soon to be made to the PAC that we will have an estate strategy in place before the end of this financial year. Obviously, estate data is absolutely critical in terms of managing the estate. It was one of the criticisms in the Audit Office report that our condition and suitability survey information was out of date. That was largely due to lack of budget to keep the surveys going, is the honest truth. We have reinstigated those with our EA colleagues. We're well through year 3 of a 5-year programme of condition surveys that will give us up-to-date, better data from which decisions, more informed decisions can be made. I can assure the committee that decisions are made on the information that we do hold, and where, say for example, in the Major Works programme, we would commission fresh condition and suitability surveys of those schools that were put forward by the various bodies. Obviously, we don't sit on our hands. We're looking at our various governance arrangements and regimes. We introduced a new governance approach to our overall capital delivery a number of years back, and we are actually genuinely starting to see the dividends on that. If I focus on the 2020 announced schemes, we're starting to see them coming through the early business case feasibility and early design stages much quicker than the earlier. We are taking steps to address the other log jams in our system in terms of delivering the estate in terms of land purchases. We got the Minister to agree that we could purchase lands much earlier rather than them being held to ransom later in a process where we're looking to move a scheme on site and we can't just secure the land at that end. We are progressing forward in procurement earlier as well. Now, regrettably, as we get improvements in the system, when we get the budget restrictions coming into play, while we have a number of major works and fresh start schemes on site, currently 12 across both programmes, we will soon have up to 14 projects at pre-construction stage ready to go, simply waiting budget, and that's not a good space to be in. I'll maybe stop there.
No, I understand. And again, anything that can streamline the delivery of capital projects is welcome, but I suppose that if you don't have the money to pay for them, it doesn't get us too far. Look, I'll leave the sort of wider structural stuff. I think that's something for the committee to pick up, and it's something we haven't really looked at in detail, but I would be concerned that we have a, particularly around just we have too many schools in the wrong places, and probably where everyone's nervous around those conversations. The only other thing I really want to ask at this stage is around school budgets. You've highlighted that, and I think probably every time you've been here, I've raised this, declaring interest as a member of a board of governors in my constituency. We have a scenario now where a large number of schools just start every year in deficit really before they begin, or very, very close to it. There's clearly an issue with how schools are funding. There's not enough money coming into the system to allow schools to live within their means. Is there an argument that before the Minister and Department would go working on other areas of discretionary spend, so the likes of agendas like Transform Ed or reviewing the curriculum or doing some of that sort of work with money attached to it, that we should be looking at front loading the system to get money into schools in the first instance, to pay the bills, to live within their means, because so much of this pressure the EA is facing is am I right in saying it's deficits, school budget deficits?
A large element of deficits. I think, Stephen, you'll keep me right, is that about 79 or 80 million is increasing deficits, and about 9 million is surplus drawdown requirement in here, so schools that are in surpluses but need to use some of it.
So if we're starting every year in deficit effectively to cover that, what can be done to put schools in a more sustainable financial footing? And should that not be the starting pressure? I'd maybe suggest school budgets and pay pressures, get the money ring fenced for that at the start of the year, and then work from there. I mean, I'm no financial expert at all, so you're probably going to tell me that's completely financially illiterate, but to me, looking at that as a layperson, is trying to understand, is there not a way to front load the money where it needs to go first?
No, it's very, very sensible. But if you take this year, for example, if all of our new pay pressures this year alongside our school's forecast position was not covered by the additional funding that we got, so we're starting on the back foot. We make an effort every year to ensure that we protect the school's budgets So whilst everybody else maybe needs to take a hit, we ensure that we don't do that to schools, and we do our best to fund all the pay pressures. So 100%, your point is very good. I think I'd love to be in the position where we could do that, and then start worrying about our other pressures. It's just not that straightforward.
There's no money earmarked at the start of the year for, say, pay pressures, which you know are coming. So you don't say we're going to set some money aside to deal with that before we realise that where the shortfalls are. But we just, as soon as our budget lands, earmark the money for pay.
You're quite right. So we've had this conversation internally recently, and this is different approaches from different ministers, really. So if I remember back to Peter Weir's time, Peter Weir would have said, look, I can't afford to give a pay offer, so I'll allocate my budget at the start of the year, and they'll only get a pay offer if the executive agree to fund it. We've taken a slightly different approach this year, where the Minister wanted to set aside a small amount at the start of the year for the teachers' pay pressure, which is about 34 million we have sitting. But in saying that, that's taken account of our overall position, if you know what I mean. It's not that we can just take that and net it off. So yeah, there's an argument with that too. That's sort of where we are at it.
Okay. Look, final thing, I said it was my last question. I just want to ask, I think it's more of a request, just of something of information that could be provided. We're conscious of the difficult position. There's obviously spending, and we see the Minister making announcements around, I'm going to throw 30 million at this or 20 million at this scheme or whatever it is. Could you provide us with a breakdown of all of that spend that is discretionary, so that's not school budgets, that's not statutory duties, but things that there's clearly money coming from somewhere to put into new initiatives? Could we get a breakdown even in this financial year what's gone out on that stuff that doesn't sit in those typical EA block grant budget lines, so the committee can actually understand where have the decisions been taken to put money into something specific when it could go into a frontline service, for instance?
Yeah, we're happy to be transparent. I can definitely provide you with something, just where the difficulty comes, even if we give you a list of everything. Where the difficulty comes is whether you decide to say something is, and we don't really like the word discretionary, we tend to use statutory or non-statutory, because the argument is maybe a lot of things that aren't covered by statute are done in support of statute. But we'll definitely come up with something. I think it's been asked in a couple of AQs recently anyway, so that's no problem.
It would be really helpful to understand that, because when you hear there's no money, I like to know, well, where have the spend decisions been made? So if we could get a document as committee to help us understand that, I think that'd be really helpful in scrutinising budgets going forward.
Yeah, that's no problem. And even if there's a bit of iteration, if we send you something and you want to come back and say, well, actually, can you tweak it? Can you do this? Can you do that? That's no problem.
But for me, the clarity is, we hear announcements on, say, Transform Ed. I'd like to see a line for Transform Ed and that broken down, what's been spent on that, and we go from there. So, yeah, okay, I'll bring in the Deputy Chair.
Thanks. Just a quick question for you, Stephen. The last time you were in front of the committee, I think must be more than 6 months ago, was it? I'm sure.
Overtake.
But in any event, you informed us that an investment strategy for Irish medium education was imminent, and we haven't heard anything about it since. And some of the Irish medium schools are in very poor accommodation, not just of recent times, but going back 20, 30 years. So I'm just wondering, is there any update on that, any progress whatsoever?
Yes, well, I'll take you what you're saying, that I said it was imminent. I just can't recall the words, to be honest, but we have been working closely with the sectoral representatives in Antibes, Nagil Sculliacta and Coirlin Nagil Sculliacta, obviously. We do have a paper in front of me which is summarising the needs across the estate. It also actually looks quite extensively at what investment has been made over the last, say, decade and whatnot across all programme streams. I think I did update you on that the last time, and I'll happily refresh that for you now, if that's helpful, but just bear with me. Over the last 10 years across the major works programme, 60.4 million has been invested, and in the main 4 major works schemes have been completed, 1 currently on site, 1 in contract and 1 in pre-construction, with 1 stuck at site search. Unfortunately, the Ahiru and Dungannon has had issues with sites. We have a range of minor work schemes in excess of 25 million have taken place over the years. We've also got the accommodation fund, which is topped up on a regular basis, and that's to allow for works that, particularly schools that aren't eligible for capital viability, to allow us to look at purchasing sites, provision of mobile accommodation, urgent essential health and safety works to keep that running.
And what's the status of that accommodation fund at the minute? What sort of funding is in the pot?
It always is topped up to 2 million. Now, I don't have the precise figures, but I do know that we were taking steps. It's an operational thing that we just keep an eye on, the idea when it was set up, it was meant to replenish itself. As a school reaches capital viability, they're entitled to get all reasonable capital costs refunded to them, at which point they pay back into the accommodation fund.
Fair enough. Is there any chance of getting a written update on all of that?
I'll happily give you an update on that,
Okay.
yes, for sure.
Thanks for that. In terms of the school estates, and I mean the financial difficulties we're facing right across the education system, where do we stand in terms of disposing of parts of the school estate that are surplus to requirements? I'm sure a fair amount of funding could be gathered up if we were to get rid of some of the stuff, sir.
I'm not sure actually how much could be gathered up. A lot of the school's estate is earmarked for future educational use, for future provision of SEN or other educational use, and are following quite closely the disposal plan for much of the rest of it. You'll find that there are a lot of small rural pieces of property which, in terms of the value that you receive from them, is versus the value of actually conducting the process in the legal fields and selling them, there's not actually much difference. We keep a close eye on the profile of lands, and there is not that much actually available to sell that would make a massive impact on the budget that we have. We have to declare up front in every budgeting year how much we expect to bring in from sales, and technically it goes back into Treasury and our budget's just reduced accordingly. If we don't make that what we declare, then we have to find it from elsewhere in the budget, and if we exceed what we declare, then it goes back to the centre.
Okay, so
I was just going to add that, if I may, Pat, that we have a team, our asset management team in the department, work on this proactively, because it's as well as everything Seamus has said, land transactions of the school estate are not often straightforward. There can be covenants, there can be trustee changes, ownership, title changes that haven't been kept, haven't kept pace with changes. You may have a parish trustee has passed away numerous years ago, but for one reason or another the trust hasn't updated that. So there's a host of work has to be done. We've also many schools that become vacant across the estate that are listed, and it is often very difficult to actually sell on listed buildings because of the nature of them, many of which can be repurposed obviously, and we engage with councils and much wider in terms of wider community use in that regard.
And just for argument's sake, if we were able to get a buyer for all the estate that's surplus to requirements, and there was one buyer there happy to pay for it all, what sort of money, I'm just asking for a ballpark figure, could be raised from that sale?
We'll have to come back to you on that one, Pat.
Right, okay. The minister spent 250 grand on phone pouches. He spent another 50 grand on a conference up in Armada, 15 grand going to Florida. He's an invitation now to go back to Israel. Does it concern you at all that, although in the overall scheme of things, in terms of percentage of the overall budget, it's quite small, but does it concern you at all that money is being spent on these particular matters? And I know your job is to try and balance the books and work on figures, but at the end of the day, when there's a shortfall of funding, as we've seen from the plan put out by the EA last week, cuts or price raises for school dinners. So who'll suffer there? The working poor, the porter in the hospital who has 3 kids at school. The music lessons will be charged for. Who'll suffer again? The people on the lowest incomes, because they'll not be able to afford it. And then kids who need placements in IOTAS in the community and voluntary sector won't get those places. All of those things, do they concern you?
I think right across the piece, so we're looking at a £3.4 billion budget, and that budget touches on a lot of areas. At the start of every financial year, we'll set out to the Minister what the pressures are and what the budget is, and the Minister will get a budget strategy. So ultimately the Minister decides it's his budget. Yes, I get your point, that there are certain areas where we're maybe applying cuts, and then other people will look at other areas and say, well, hang on a minute, should we not be funding that? I suppose that comes down to ministerial priority. And also, look, we need to take cognizance that whilst we're overspending to the tune of £280 million, we're really talking around the edges here, you know, to really do something significant to achieve that amount of money would be very difficult. But I take...
I understand it's a small amount, but does it concern you then when the Audit Office and the PAC are say in their reports that despite hundreds of millions of pounds going into special educational needs, I mean, we're talking about eye water and sums here, that neither the EA nor the department can demonstrate value for money? And we've heard stories about, in terms of transport costs and stuff like that, you know, where it's clear that a 10-year-old child could organise a better system than what the EA is doing at the minute in some cases. I mean, you know, there's a taxi comes in to a school and drives 50 yards across the playground to deliver the school dinners 5 days a week. Do you think you could sort out a better system, Neil?
I'd like to think so.
Do you?
I have heard that.
Do you know anybody that couldn't sort something better than that?
No.
You know, so what I'm asking you is, I mean, are you concerned about that? Does that keep you awake at night, that, you know, there's hundreds of millions being spent and we can't even say it's good value for money?
Yeah, well, look, I'll take that first. I think Stephen might have a few comments as well, but I'll just go first. So in terms of SEN, I couldn't sit here hand on heart and say, yeah, that's VFM, and I'm not sure if my EA colleagues or policy colleagues could either. There's been an ongoing end-to-end review that you'll be aware of, which has come to an end, as far as I'm aware, and there's going to be a report. As part of that, the reform agenda has kicked off for SEN, and the point of that is looking at, okay, what are we currently providing in terms of SEN, and is it cost effective, and is there a better way of doing it that is potentially also more cost effective? I won't go any further than that because that sits under a different directorate, but yes, there are huge concerns right across the board, and we do raise them and we do look at them. Sorry, Stephen.
Take it in reverse order, Pat. Obviously, in parallel with you raising that very point with the Minister about the school meals issue and not only the special schools, I think it was a mainstream school with the specialist provision. We are conscious of that in a number of settings, and that is of concern, is the simple answer to that. The reason for that, I am advised, is because depending on the needs presenting, bringing the pupil into a large canteen environment, which is noisy, you know, disruptive.
No, I understand that, and there's flight risk and everything. But
balancing that with the same objectives of inclusion and whatnot, this has to be considered quite closely. One of my teams has been meeting with school meals people in the Education Authority, senior school meals people, just to look at this very issue, and we're a wee bit off yet. We still have to have some of the discussions with the policy leads to see, you know, how does that impact inclusion if we reached out and put kitchen or very modest small canteen facilities in the special needs provision, how that would impact on, you know, where kids need to be, you know, interwoven within the community of the school. So we are acutely aware of it. We're, as you say, we're not happy about it either, and we will be taking steps to deal with it, and I'm happy to keep you posted on what we're doing as we move forward. Early discussions, it's really only come into our radar in the last week or so, and particularly almost in parallel with you raising it with the Minister in recent weeks. In terms of the VFM point, I'll keep it brief. While I say we welcome the Audit Office report, we did respond back in terms of the value for money point, that every piece of capital expenditure is supported by a full business case that looks at options, it looks at the costs, it looks at the risks associated with delivery, and you end up with the preferred option. So we can actually give an assurance that on the basis of those supporting cases that the best value solution is being brought forward. In terms of the selection of the projects, taking it a step further back, arguably, as a previous permanent secretary used to say, the selection of major capital is effectively a competition, and we invite the sectors to nominate the relevant, the schools that they believe that they need to be brought forward, and it's important that we do work with the sectors. So in terms of value for money, as I say, we achieve full budget over the last, full budget spend over the last 10 years, which in essence is one target we have in the business case, but the question you would maybe raise is, but have you spent it on the right things? That's what we will have. That's what we believe we're doing. In terms of the estate strategy, one of the emerging themes is a balanced programme is where we need to go, because we have a huge maintenance backlog as well, and while that's resource budget, the surveys are indicating that by the time, if we extrapolate forward, we could be £800 million worth of backlog across a very aged estate. So we have to look across the piece, and I'll stop there.
Thanks for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Dana, you'd indicated there.
Thank you, Chair. And Pat's covered a good load of it. I suppose I just want to go into in the Minister's spending line, because what I am concerned about, because you let it out even when there wasn't a Minister, what programmes it always gets cut, and it's always the low-hanging fruit, if you ask me my opinion, on really good programmes that benefit children who need it the most. And EODIS centres, that worries you, because you said that the EA went for this here, so it doesn't go into the community and voluntary sector. But my experience, when you take something away from the community and voluntary sector, you just can't leave these children, so they then be looked after internally. That ends up costing more money in the long run. And that's the same with youth services as well. It's more cost effective to have it in the community and voluntary sector.
Okay, so I'm not going to pretend to be an expert over that particular policy area.
I'm just saying, it does tends to be that there, because if it's in the community and voluntary sector, you're going to stop the referrals. That means doors will close come next summer. Like there's one of my own constituency that's based in Poglass, but it goes into Lagan Valley. There's kids from both sides, cross community goes into it there, and these kids are on their last chance. Like, I really worry about them. This is the low hanging fruit, which will save very, very small money. And my criticism of that is, Pat touched on the £250,000 for phone pouches. I'm only highlighting that because I don't want to play that game of who spends what on this. But it's the pilot scheme thing of it that annoys me the most, because unless you are planning to fund that properly and really are going to be committed to it, like, which will cost then multi-million pounds to do, why waste £250,000? Like, how is that good management of budgets? Like, I can't work that out.
I don't know if I have an answer for you. So first of all, that's semantics, but the pouches are being met from the capital budget, so that's not our current recurring budget. And look, it was a ministerial decision. This is an area that they wanted to do a pilot in, and it's going ahead. Yeah, but
when you're on the Joe Public are listening to that, they hear the cuts that are coming through last week. It's £300 million. Regardless of where it's coming from, it is going to be just a pilot, unless the minister's going to commit to then probably roughly going by the way the South was population. It's going to cost about £5 million plus with a reoccurring cost. It just does not fit where we're sitting right now.
Look, I can't foresee what the minister's going to do. They will do the pilot, and they'll do a review of that, and they'll decide whether there's going to be something which is taken further at the end of that period. I suppose the point I'm trying to make, and again, you're probably quite right, it doesn't matter to Joe Public, but that element of funding is not coming out of the resource budget, if you know what I mean.
You
so
know,
it's coming out of the capital budget,
I get
so
that.
It wouldn't help us in that respect.
But you start off, the budget starts off in a deficit with it every time. So if you're starting off and you know the constraints, you're going to put something there, pilot, unless you're really convinced that you're going to, like, you're not going to do a pilot if you're never going to fund it. You know, if it comes back with good, oh, that looks good, we'll go ahead. That's multi-million pounds getting attached to that when we're putting more pressure on families.
Yeah, look, and that may be the case. Look, I don't know whether it will continue on or not. But I suppose the point I was trying to make again is that you know, if we didn't run the pilot, we couldn't utilise that money to save some of the savings that were announced last week, which were resource savings.
Just the last point about,
doesn't mean anything.
But see what it does come to the cut. Just last point, because as the EA, because like you did say there, it's only came to your attention in the last couple of weeks that what Pat was talking about as well. Look, we know that sort of behaviour has been happening for many years, so it does worry me that it's only landing on your desk about that type of stuff. To me, it's wastage as well. And going back to the EODIS centres, that will end up probably costing either the same or more money, so there's no real savings in the long run, really. And I think that needs to be taken into consideration when the EA are making these cuts. Yeah, thank you.
Gary, here.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your presentation. Obviously, it's very, very stark. Certainly when you look at the projections over this next couple of years, and health used to always be the outlier in terms of those massive amounts of monies and shortfalls, and clearly education is in the same frame. In terms of the savings, I do agree with Pat in terms of the estate issue. I think certainly from my own personal experience, there's schools out there who have closed or moved or amalgamated, and I have found the process to be very, very slow. I know of many sites, former Fahan Valley site on the Drumahoe, the main road into Londonderry, sat, and it's been sitting now for coming on to 20 years in 2027, and it's only recently sold. So I think that the department could be a bit more proactive in terms of getting rid of those sites which attract antisocial behaviour and all of those sorts of things. So we'd look forward maybe just to a piece of work around the value of those sites and how maybe we could progress that. In terms of the savings proposals, you know, the EA's 30 million, like, let's be honest, it is small scale, but it's a huge impact for families. And I have to say that I have had, you know, correspondence in relation to that, particularly the school meals issue, but also the impact that it has, even in terms of the music service. But in your presentation on the slide, you refer to really the only way, certainly in this, that you've said that you could cover the extensive shortfall would be to look at redundancies. 25% of teaching staff, 10% of non-teaching staff. I don't need to say, obviously, I'm assuming you've done an impact as to what that would mean for children and for schools.
We haven't gone that far simply because we don't see it as being realistic. I suppose what we're doing with that is illustrating that at this point in time, looking at the options that are available to us, that would be the road you'd have to go down to make those kinds of savings.
And there's no other savings proposals within the department?
There are. So we talked about the EA's recent savings that they announced last week.
I know on top of those. Sorry,
yes, so alongside that list, they had other categories of savings which haven't been implemented yet, categories 2 and 3. Which we're looking at more closely with the EA to see if there's anything that can be brought forward. But the reality is from a departmental perspective, we've looked at them and thought, well, that's not likely to crystallise in this financial year. Which is why I think it's much more important at this point in time to start looking at much longer term initiatives. And even in saying that, we need to be realistic. If we implemented in the department every single thing that I would want to implement, you'd come nowhere near the 890 million that we need next year. You probably wouldn't come anywhere near 100 or 150 million, but I think it's important that we're in that space where we're looking at, okay, what can we do as a department before we go asking.
And in terms of the December monitoring I picked up right, that's solely capital, did you say?
Well, it is for both, but we can't bid for a resource. So I think, don't quote me, it's on the basis that there's been a commitment given already around about £150 million for pay, and it was ourselves, health, justice and infrastructure, I think. And the various amounts that we say that we need have been added together, and a commitment has been made that they will be prioritised. Okay. So the assumption being is that we don't anticipate to have any more than that, even if that available at block level as part of December monitoring. So the
only area you see potentially for additional money becoming available would be in the capital side?
Yes, I would think so, and these guys will be closer to it than me.
In terms of the prioritisation of those capital proposals, where is that, or who?
We're currently gathering information from the Education Authority and other people who would bid for capital as to what their needs are for the remainder of the year, but not just what their needs are, what they can spend in the remainder of the year, because unlike resource, capital is not something we can turn off and on. So those bids are being gathered and will be submitted to DOF probably this time next week.
Yeah, it'll be early December the latest.
Hagar. No other indications?
Michelle. Sorry for being a bit distracted as well. I'm dealing with some childcare issues right now. These committees keep running late. But that's prompted my first question. We're waiting on the childcare strategy and the early years strategy to come through. I'm interested to know, apart from the executive funding for childcare, how much does the education budget go to childcare?
I can't answer that one off the top of my head. I'm not sure if my colleague has it in front of him.
Yeah, about 44.6 million is what we have for our early years provision. So
on the department's budget.
Sorry, that would be early years, and so within that.
That's the department's budget, not the executive money.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
That's right.
And we're getting a lot of feedback from frustration from schools around money that they're getting that they feel they can't spend. And that's difficult in the current climate. So if I use the example of Transform Ed, and absolutely want to see money go into CPD, but we're getting feedback that that money's coming through and they're struggling to spend it, and that's quite difficult for schools in the context of their own school budget position, to think that there's money swirling around that they're struggling to spend because they're sending people to England to do courses just to get it spent. But it's very hard for them to, there's no direction how to focus that investment. So those decisions around like 30 million, how is that figure reached? Who decides that's the right number?
So it'll be the policy lead in that area. It's not something that we would get involved in at finance level. Our colleagues will go away and do their sums and come to us. That's how it's done. Now, if I understand correctly, that 30 million is over a number of years. That's not especially, and I wasn't aware. It's the first time I've heard that. Then that school leaders were struggling with spending the funding that they're getting for that. It's quite a lot of money to
try and diss out in year, and they think they would. The feedback I've got from some, they'd really rather spend that on other things if they could. That classrooms crumbling, things like that. How's the value for money then assessed for those types of schemes?
All of those schemes will be subject to a business case. Which has to prove value for money before it can go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to not take credit for this question. Somebody raised with me a concept zero-based budgeting. Is that something that you're aware of? I'm assuming your field you are, but
zero. So this could take a while.
Yeah. But is it something you've considered? Because it feels like
100%. It's something that we do to a certain extent. So if you look at the resource budget, largely what we do is roll that budget forward and then take account of knowns and unknowns, and you sort of give or take away. Okay, so that's rolled forward budget. What our colleagues do actually in IAD is more like zero-based budgeting, is that you're starting from zero every year and you're saying, okay, what do we need to do this year? What does it cost? And where to go with it? So it's those differing models for different business needs. Would I love to be able to do zero-based budgeting with the resource budget? Yes, but it would have to be an awful lot bigger budget than the current one. But no, it's not something that sort of suits our current model.
Okay, it feels like we need to start thinking radically about
yes, and that would be lovely.
Yeah. The projected decline in school places is 12.7% by 2033-34. How are you factoring that into your financial projections?
In terms of our financial projections, we take our lead from our area planning colleagues there. So I fully acknowledge there has to be a recognition there that we already have a small schools issue. And if enrolments are going to go the way that they're forecast to go, then we should have a plan. I don't want to speak on behalf of my area planning colleagues who have their own director. That's maybe a question you could put to them. But yes, it's certainly something which is on my radar.
Yeah, no, it's just getting, Gary mentioned it earlier about health as well. I hear his colleagues speak regularly about the need to reform and transform health. And the idea of just getting more and more money all the time without anybody doing any serious transformation is a point they make about health. But I think it's a fair point to be made in terms of education as well. And the sense is that there's no real commitment to do that. They would just want more money, and you're projecting more and more of a shortfall, but school places are going down. Doesn't seem like anybody's really grasping that at all. And that's a frustration. I think that's a legitimate frustration.
I absolutely would be on your side on this, and that's where we're talking about my personal preference to focus on the longer term at the minute, and it is looking at those structural changes and radical changes, because I think that's what we need to do. Now, in saying that, I still don't think it'll provide us with the level of savings that we need, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. I think we should do it.
How much you know of any figure, and perhaps it's a wild question, but how much are you spending on pilots? It feels like right now there's services. I know you've used this expression, resource savings. Those are cuts to services. So like if we're doing things like pilots, it feels like maybe this is not the time for pilots. This is the time to fund the things that we need to do.
I couldn't give you an overall figure.
Yeah, sorry.
We would know, but certainly something
we could look into it and come back to you.
Yeah. And I think, Stephen, did you have something to add there?
Yes, it was just on the capital side, certainly on the SEN capital programme, we're very much doing just as you've described, as a real example. It's the tension of, as you've described, with the projections coming forward, but the real need where the projections are going through the roof on SEN placements. So we are looking at repurposing existing capacity across the estate, and that is the first port of call before we start putting in additional provision. The emergency provision goes in the modular, and then it's planned out for a more permanent solution. In many cases we have to look at repurposing back, because what we've done is we've maybe taken libraries, computer rooms or whatever off schools to put in that much needed SEN provision. But it is the first port of call in the SEN capital programme to look at capacity within the existing estate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that brings us to the end of the briefing, and look, I just can't emphasise enough that we appreciate your patience with the lateness and appreciate your time with the briefing. Just on a final point, we're obviously in a pretty tight position here with the way budgets are going. There's not anything anticipated coming through in December, and really the message today is you're clearly on course for an overspend. When do you think the next time to brief committee would appropriately be to give us a sense, and as close to December when final likely position where we are, because this is I feel like we're into unprecedented territory here, and I don't think that should be understated.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I suppose not to drag things out, but anecdotally in the department I've been accused of being the boy that cried wolf. So for 14 years I've been telling everybody we're not getting anything additional at the start of the year, so plan for that, and then we get peeled. Whereas this year I've been telling everybody this feels different, and I think that's the direction we are going in. Probably a good time for us to brief you would be when we know, or at least when we know the outcome of December monitoring. Not that I anticipate anything huge to come out of that, but who knows what could happen. So if we'll await the outcome of that, and we'll engage with Aoibhinn and get something.
Certainly a written briefing, just as soon as that's available, so the committee's clear on the
after the bids,
okay, and then we can assess from there. But I think it's important in terms of just openness and transparency, where we're in uncharted territory here. So okay, thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, members. So don't think there are any actions arising. There was some information I had asked for, which the officials had undertaken to provide. Are we content to move on? So look, we if members need to leave, there may be decisions that we can't take at this stage. So I'm going to suggest working through correspondence that it is agreed as per the summary note. There's nothing that was in there for me that if we move to item 9 that I think needed any particular decision. And I would just suggest to members, if they do want to bring anything back out of the correspondence, to let either myself or the clerk know for next week. I think we're going to reach difficulties with decision making.
Yeah, and I have a list of the things that you mentioned in that session, so we'll write that letter to the department about the budget. Yeah. John did it in AOB, but I'm not sure that he's there, and I have tried to check in. I think he might just not have turned off his device.
No problem. Okay. Well, look, that leaves us item 10, which is forward work programme. We'll speak to it in detail next week. It is ticking over exactly as we'd want to. We're getting through our sessions, so our members agreed to endorse the draft forward work programme.
Agreed.
Yeah. Jim will come to you about arranging a visit to GTC before that bill comes in, so probably this month.
And then item 11 is any other business. Is there any? Nope. We'll pick up John's item next week, and then item 12 is date, place and time of next meeting, and that will be Wednesday the 19th of November, 2 p.m, room 29 and online. And I'll just put the question that the committee meeting does now adjourn. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thanks everybody.